Good morning, everyone. Welcome again. Good morning, everyone. Welcome again. It's always nicer to have a standing room only than an empty hall. So thank you for making it so nice. We are now starting our traditional event of the symposium called Geopolitical Symposium. Each time there is a different subtitle. This year's the subtitle is Key Political and Economic Trends and the Evolving Role of the Media. You can see from our panelists who will be introduced shortly why the match is nothing short of perfect. What we will do is I will introduce the panelists, each one in her turn, and then we will open the floor. So there will be 4 brief introductory remarks on the subject that the panelists choose, as long as it is under the umbrella of the subject matter. As you can see, we have a very diverse group of people. And by the way, you notice that in contrast with all of our fora up to now, I did not start with the usual protocol, Mr. President, governors, rector. It is now open for all. You should feel free to intervene, ask questions, do anything you want. You will not leave the room hungry if you wish to get something. In honor of our people on the podium and on the presidium, I will start with the language which they understand. Buenos días, bienvenido de la Universidad de Tel Aviv. Felicidades en su doctorado, es un honor contar con su presencia. They told me that the interpreters did not have room in this place, so we will move into English. You wanted me to say something?
Just the speakers should speak from here so that the camera can catch them for the other places.
This is our Sergeant Major, and nobody would dare doing something that she does not know. But now she's out, we can move on. Let's move on, let's move on. Let me start with the first presentation. And it's really my great honor and pleasure to introduce Dr. Karnit Flug, who is the governor of the Bank of Israel. Karnit has been governor now for almost 5 years. She has been identified with the Bank of Israel for the past, who counts, 30 years. She was formerly a deputy governor, director of research, etc., etc. The most important thing about her, and you will see it is a common thread, she was born in Poland. She was brought to Israel by her parents when she was very young. I will not give you the number because all of you are with calculators, and I know that. But I want you to know, for those of you who may leave the room a little later, nobody in this podium was born in Israel. All of them chose, either by actions or by their parents' action, to tie and connect their lives to this great country and to this great university. And this is why we call it Geopolitical, Geo-Economic Forum at Tel Aviv University. By the way, since it is broadcast internationally, yesterday in a meeting that President Klafter and I had with Jack Ma of Alibaba, it was decided that the branch of Alibaba in Israel will be called Alitao. I'm still introducing our great governor, Dr. Karnit Flug. She has not only been with the Bank of Israel, she has come to the Bank of Israel extremely well prepared. She has had a graduate degree from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. This was before Tel Aviv was a university, mind you. And she then earned her PhD at Columbia University, going on to international organizations like the IMF, like the Inter-American Development Bank. That's why her third language is Spanish. And most importantly, as governor, she stood and is standing firm to protect the institutions that protect democracy. A common theme of the discussion today would be, what do we need to do and what is being done to protect democracy through the various institutions, legal, economic, financial, media, and this is the way these people have been chosen. She has been consistently identified as one of the top 10 governors in terms of their performance and backbone, and therefore she will come here now, please, and make a brief presentation about the Israeli economy. The reason why we decided to have it in this way is that some of you have come a long way. You hear about Israel a lot through the lens of army and bombs, much less about through the lens of the economy and the wonders that are being done here. So Karnit will give you a rather professional, not full of jargon, but a rather professional presentation about the state of Israel. We will move on then with the second speaker. Thank you.
Thank you, Yaakov, and it's a great honor to be here. And as was said, I'll give you a brief presentation about the economy. I'll start with the current situation, sort of brief overview of the current state of the economy, and then move on to talk about sort of longer term issues and also some challenges. Okay, so the Israeli economy is a small open economy, is closely linked to the global economy. It's part of the global cycles, and the economy has been doing well, and we've been growing at about 3.5% annually, which is quite an achievement given that until recently the global economy was not in great shape. The fact that the economy is doing well is reflected, maybe most importantly, in the labor market. Our unemployment has been at a record low. Our employment rate has been at a record high, with populations actually joining the labor market and increasing their labor participation, which is a very positive phenomena, and it's sort of a long-term phenomena. The strength of the labor market and the tightness is reflected in an increase in wages. Wages have been growing at about 3% annually, so the income level is going up, the standard of living is going up, and that's the main positive achievement, I would say, in the recent years. Inflation, which, as you know, central banks care about, has been very low. In fact, we've been undershooting our inflation target. Inflation is below where it should be according to our target, but the undershooting is for good reasons. It's not reflecting a weakness of the economy, but rather some developments which are associated with the positive developments, such as the strengthening of the shekel, which is a reflection of the positive state of the economy, and also enhanced competition, which, by the way, yesterday we've seen Jack Ma from Alibaba, and he has contributed, or his action has contributed a lot to the competitiveness around the world, but also to the competition in Israel with the growing share of purchases through the internet and so on. So the economy has become, or competition has been enhanced, and that has been pushing inflation down. So this is just an overview of the current state, and let me talk about longer term issues. And the most important, I would like to talk about I would say, the strengths of the Israeli economy, and in particular, the strengths of Israel's innovation ecosystem, which had been actually the engine of growth in Israel. We've heard a little bit about it yesterday in the ceremony. So just to give you an overview, we have about 6,000 companies which are innovation-based. Some of them are startups, some of them are more mature companies, and they're in many, many areas, including cyber, including clean tech, fintech, health, digital health, and so on. And actually, I think Israeli companies are pushing the frontier of innovation in many, many areas. And the main, I would say, attributes that are standing behind the strength of the innovation-based sector in the Israeli economy can be summarized in some of the international innovation rankings, which actually point out to what are the main attributes behind the strengths in the innovation sector. And what they point to is, first of all, obviously, human capital. We have great universities. They produce the scientific aptitude and people with the technological skills that can actually push the technological frontier. The other element they mention is the strong collaboration between the universities and industry. Part of it is also with the support actually of the state, with some subsidiaries that help commercialize some of the ideas that are being created in the university and then move on to the industry. Another element that is mentioned in these rankings is the support of the state for R&D activity, and that was very important, especially early on. Nowadays, actually, most of the R&D is produced by the industry itself. And the fourth element that is mentioned is the venture capital industry. Again, early on, it was actually developed with the help of the state, and now it's actually a very well-developed industry, and we know that there is a lot of financing actually seeking innovation in Israel and investing in Israeli innovation. But I think these sort of elements that can be quantified don't tell the whole story. And there are at least two other elements that I would like to mention. One is, in some areas, I think we can talk about the necessity as the mother of invention. And water, or the water industry, is one example where Israel, being a very dry country, most of it had been desert, actually is leading in some of the main technologies to deal with water shortage, including leading in desalination, leading in water waste recycling, which is over 80%, by the way, the highest by far from any other country, the invention of drip irrigation. All of these, I think, give an example of the kind of need that pushes the innovation frontier. There are other areas, including cyber security, for example, where the need also led to the development in that industry, and other areas around defense. So I think this is another attribute that sort of stands behind the strength in this area. And then there is another element which in some way was also mentioned yesterday in the speech of Jack Ma, and I was surprised to hear him talk about chutzpah. And actually, I think this summarizes another cultural element, which is the willingness to take risk and to fail and to learn from your mistakes and failures, to actually get the experience that comes from that and try another idea. And what I show here is that most startups actually end in a failure. Only less than 5% of startups, which come with very bright ideas, mature into a company that actually is then sold like Mobileye or Waze that you all know. Most of them don't succeed, but the people that actually deal or develop these ideas move to the next idea, and they learn from the process. And I think the chutzpah, meaning the willingness to risk your own money, other people's money, in order to try try idea, I think, is a cultural element that also helps explain the success of the innovation-based sector in Israel. Yet, we also have challenges. I talked about the engine of growth and the engine of the economy, but we have some challenges. And when we look at the whole economy and not only at that sector, actually when we look forward, we see some headwinds to growth over the next years. One headwind, I would say, is the fact that the global economy is not expected to produce the kind of demand that we've seen looking backwards. And especially world trade has been growing much slower than in the past. In the past, it grew about twice the pace of growth of the global economy. And with the threats of world trade war and so on, it might even get slower. So that's one headwind that for a small open economy is definitely threatening the prospects of growth. The other element that is, I would say, a headwind for future growth has to do with the demographics, the fact that in Israel, the groups that tend to have lower rates of participation in the labor market are growing in share, especially the Haredim and the Arab population. And also after a large expansion in the number of years of schooling, we don't expect to see continued increase in the expansion, and that's a headwind. But also when we look back over the last 20 years, the productivity has not been growing at a pace so as to close the gap vis-a-vis the most advanced economies. So we have a very productive sector, but when we look at the economy as a whole, you can see that the productivity has more or less grown like in other advanced economies, but not any faster. So we've not been closing the gap. And the main reasons that are for the fact that we're not closing the gap, there are actually three categories of reason. One is the fact that our infrastructure is not, I would say, not adequate, and we've not been investing enough in infrastructure, especially in transportation, in public transportation, and actually we are sort of at a closing or at the end of the ranking in general government capital stock, which is mostly infrastructure. The other weakness that we have, and that may surprise you, is that when we look at the basic skills of people, adult people in Israel, compared to advanced economies, we're not scoring well at the international standardized tests. And I'm talking about skills that are relevant for the labor market, especially skills that have to do with functioning in digital environment. So when we look at the average Israeli, they don't function that well in a skill which is very basic for the labor market of the 21st century. And also in other areas, we're not doing well. Obviously, education has a lot to do with that, the general education system. And the third element of weakness is the fact that our business environment is not friendly enough. And what I mean by that is mostly over-regulation, inconsistent regulation. To get a business permit to start an operation, you have to go through many, many layers, and that sort of is a very heavy burden of companies, and that also contributes to the relatively low productivity performance. I mentioned already education, and I think this is probably the biggest, I would say, challenge for the Israeli society. We actually, when we look at the number of years of schooling in Israel, on average, it's quite high. But then when we look at the skills that people have at each level of schooling, we see that the performance at the standardized tests is actually quite disappointing. And you can see here that it's true for every level of schooling, including bachelor degree, secondary school, and even at master's degree. So we get a lot of years, but we don't get, the content is not sufficient to prepare people for the labor market. When we look at the gaps also in these skills, we see that there are significant gaps among populations in these skills across populations. We have a very diverse society, and as you can see, there are different, big differences in all areas, such as problem solving in the technology environment, in numeracy, in literacy, between the ultra-Orthodox, the Arabs, and the rest of the population. So our education system is not providing actually for every group of or every population sufficient skills for successful engagement in the labor market. Some of these developments actually are reflected also in inequality. What we see here are measures of inequality, and if we look only at the bottom line, that's the Gini of disposable income, or a measure of inequality. You can see that in the early 2000s, actually inequality went up, and over the last few years, it has been going down, which is a very positive development. The fact that it has been going down is because of what I mentioned at the very beginning. Weaker populations are also getting into the labor market, and we have a much higher proportion today of families with two breadwinners than we had in the past, and that helps to reduce the inequality. However, there are still very significant gaps in wages per hour, and that's basically a reflection of the insufficient skills of some of those who are entering into the labor market. And I would say that inequality is still a very significant challenge when we look at the inequality of income in Israel compared to advanced economies. We are still at the high side, which basically brings me to the main policy, which I think can deal with this big challenge. And actually the main, I would say, investment that Israel needs to make in order to be on a sustainable and inclusive growth in the future is investing in education at all levels. We need the highest top-notch professionals, ones that are produced also by Tel Aviv University and other universities to continue move forward the engine of growth, but we also need a better level of education for all parts of society, from early childhood and all the way to the top universities. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Karnit. You spoke and you mentioned Jack Ma's speech from yesterday, and again, in a discussion that we had before it in the President's office, the question was, what is unique about the innovative culture that makes one country more innovative than other? And he told us about his failures, and then we agreed to replace the word failure with the word setback. Failure has a sense of finality. Setback means it's a work program to move on, and that's probably what it is. Okay, great. We are moving now to our next speaker, Dr. Luis Alberto Lacalle de Herrera, once a president, always a president, president of the great Republic of Uruguay between 1990 and 1995. Prior to his real vocation, where he has been standing tall and protecting democratic institutions with a great moral compass. Prior to this, many years ago, he was in journalism, in law, and even elected to the parliament as a deputy, probably close to 50 years ago. But very soon, there was the military coup, and parliament was dissolved, and he was looking for a job. Jack Ma also looked for a job, but as it happened, democracy was restored, and he was re-elected as the president of the Senate, and moving on to be the president of the great country. What is remarkable is that our guest has created institutions within Uruguay to promote, protect, and stand by Israel as a completely uncompromising principle. And indeed, this is one of the points that was mentioned yesterday in the citation that gave him the honorary degree. I must say, it is not only us that have recognized the great qualities of our guest. It is the Queen of England who decided to bestow knighthood about him. It is actually Jerusalem Prize. And needless to say, all the national medals from the neighboring countries that have good taste, whether it is Ecuador, Chile, Argentina, Bolivia, Brazil, Spain. He has written a book with a very, very important title. And I think that the book will stay with us for many years. The title, he can always put new content into it, which is Game Changer Events. You have been a game changer. Please, Mr. President.
Thank you for being here. One of the problems of having Richard Quest is that you can compare how broken our English is. So with this disadvantage, we'll try to have a profitable morning. From Uruguay to China seems a bit out of the way. There is a fake news, fake story, in which the Uruguayan president goes to visit Chairman Mao, and Chairman Mao says, well, how nice to have you here. How big a population has Uruguay? 3.5 million, Mr. Chairman. In which hotel are they staying? Because a game change is a very, very illustrative, very neat description of some things that happen and have happened recently. Game changers are events that really move the order of battle, the tensions. For instance, Brexit is a typical game change event. Nobody predicted it, and it's really, we haven't seen the last consequences of it, and it can be dire for Britain and for Europe and for the Western world at least. Some other game changers are, for instance, the election of President Donald Trump, which was, all stacks were against him. Everybody, all the polls were saying he won't be elected, and he did arrive to the presidency. I won't go into an analysis of President Trump's policies, but one of the game changers that his presidency in the White House has become is the isolationism, the changing of the diplomacy, very generically, of the United States towards the rest of the world. Isolationism in the United States is not a new tendency. Since the beginning, George Washington, when he was asked to accept a third presidential period, he said, of course not, and then he wrote a letter to the people of the United States saying, beware of getting involved in things of the world. We have enough in our hands. Of course, it was a time of agrarian republic, but anyway, and Wilson, after President Wilson, after this First World War, and even FDR was very, very much in the mood of not involving England, United States in the war, And thus England had to carry the weight of war for the 39, 40, 41, and 42. So this gentleman now, with these ideas of America first, of blowing all the bridges, of the Paris Accord, the TPP, which was such a great idea of uniting commercially the countries of the Pacific Ocean, well, he's looking the other way. And the other, I won't say game change because it's not an innovation, it's not a novelty, but the push of China to fill the gaps and to become a formal first-rate player in politics in the world is one of the great game changers we are living through. Could you imagine when you read President Xi's speech in Davos? I beg you to read it. It's impressive because if you don't know who's speaking, would say, well, an American chairman of the board, a British diplomat, because it's all about free trade, opening the world. It's really, really impressive because we know that China, since Deng Xiaoping, which was the great game changer for China, has another phase, another activity, another presence. But this gentleman now has the perpetual power in his pocket. He's going all around the world changing the game. And it's not only the fact that being 1.3 billion inhabitants, I always say China has two special cards to play. One is number. If we get for one so Chinese to have one more steak a week, Uruguayan economy is saved. So, if you, well, but let's go the other way. If you get 1.3 billion persons, half of them, a third of them, to spend $100 more per month, you change the economy of the world. So number is one of the impossible to equate assets of China, the new China. And the other is time, the sense of time. For China, 100 years are nothing. When our father Abraham went out of Chaldea to arrive to the Promised Land one day, China already had a government, state, banks, everything. One of the most important things many important things have been said and written by Dr. Kissinger in his blockbuster on China. He says, well, China was always there. There is no date. There is no birth certificate. They were always there. When history began to be written, they were there, which is a sensation. Of course, the Jewish people, we have how much? 3,000?
We're always there, Jews.
We're always there. But sadly enough, only 70 years of a state. These people have had history on their side. So when they signed the treaty with England on the possession or the occupation of Hong Kong, 100 years, nobody said what a good deal it was for China. Perhaps it was, at that moment, a good deal for England. For the Chinese, 100 years is nothing. And time has a sense of becoming almost outmost and almost bigger reality. Time is history. And one day, the Union Jack went down, and the other are in Hong Kong. So to deal with a country of those two assets, number, and the sense of history is very different. So that's why in that small essay I wrote last year, which is called Latin America Between Trump and China, we are analyzing that China is not only now only a market, it's the biggest market, and that's why Mr. Cameron, who was first Prime Minister, went there, Mrs. Merkel, everyone goes to Beijing because they have the number. But nowadays they are investing and investing heavily in our part of the world at least. They are investing in knowledge companies, whatever you say it in IQ, whatever companies Dr. Flug was speaking about, innovative companies. The Chinese are investing in Brazil and Argentina. They are acquiring bases. The typical sign of imperialism is to have a foreign basis in, now they have one in Djibouti, and they're looking at the Mediterranean. So that is, from my point of view, the greatest change in history and politics of our time. So I think we will go on speaking about this because it affects not only small countries like the one that stay in the hotel, but also the big countries and everyone. The Belt and Road Initiative comes here, to this shoreline of the Mediterranean. Is it true? Are the Chinese a charitable organization? Of course not. Are they a typical empire of the old quality? I don't know. Perhaps they would like to have logistics, shipping, containers, ports, facilities to travel and to take merchandise from one point to the other. So we are in the eve of a new tendency in world power, and I think this exceptionalism from China must be taken in account. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. You obviously inspired the audience. When you say that in China time ticks at a different pace, it reminds me of the Chinese leader who was asked very recently, what do you think about the Industrial Revolution that took place? And his answer was, we have to wait to see how time grades it. I think this is a great way to bring us to the introduction of our next speaker, Dr. Ilana Dayan-Orbach. Mr. President, you spoke about the Chinese buying everything that moves, all things that even do not move. What concerns others is not that they buy or do not buy, but rather are the property rights, especially intellectual property rights, respected. And this brings us to the world of law, the world in which institutions are protecting democracy in general, property rights in particular, freedom of speech, reflections, and there is no better way to introduce Ilana Dayan as the queen of these fields. In Israel, you are the queen. So when our president got the knighthood from the queen, it was only a prelude to the real queen. Well, Ilana Dayan is really one of the most important and fashion setter and prominent and credible Israeli journalist. She is anchoring now for 25 years the program called Uvda. Uvda means fact. There is no adjective, fake, true, whatever. There is only one thing, fact or no fact. And in order to establish what is a fact and what is not, it takes a lot of digging, a lot of homework, a lot of efforts, and that's what is her claim to fame. And maybe because her parents brought her from another country when she was pretty young, she arrived here. But before she got her mandate, she's from Argentina, don't worry. But her mother is Uruguayan. I can tell you in the corridor, the Argentinian told me she is Uruguayan light, and the Uruguayan told me she is Argentinian light. She is also an LLM and JSD, which is a PhD from Yale University Law School. She has been a radio correspondent starting her career here with the IDF 36 years ago. And she has been, I must say, and that's important to notice, the first woman anchor for our daily TV interview, Erev Chadash, New Evening. And I'm very proud that our panel is not male only, and the list of our honorary degrees last night was not male only, and I think that the balance is moving in the right direction. It was amazing to hear yesterday Jack Ma again saying, my aim is to help the environment, small and medium-sized company, and make sure that women get their right place in society. So thank you very much for leading this way. We should, by the way, all of those guys that I were speaking up to now, and also Ilana, are newly minted honorary degrees of Tel Aviv University, which is something that is not a small measure. So, Ilana, I invite you here. You are the last one that I can tell you what to speak about, but I know that we will speak about the importance of democracy institutions. She is teaching at Tel Aviv University, mind you, for the last quarter century. Thank you.
It's awkward to be between the president from Uruguay and Richard Cuesta. I have gotten rid of my South American accent, but I haven't brushed my British accent yet, so I will try my best. I do want to say something from the bottom of my heart before I start. There was something yesterday evening that struck me, and I'm in this campus for over 30 years now. I've studied here as a law student in the mid-80s, and I've been teaching here for many years. And it's only yesterday that I realized how much I love this place, how unique this campus is, and how much of Tel Aviv, in the positive term of Tel Aviv, it has in it. It is really a wonderful university and a wonderful place, and it's a great opportunity for me to say that. I saw a brief television interview the other day in which Ted Koppel, the great American TV reporter, was a guest in Sean Hannity's Fox News television program. And Sean Hannity is, of course, identified with a specific part of American journalism today, right-wing, and very much Trump admirer. And there was one sentence that Koppel told him when Hannity asked him, am I causing a damage to American democracy? And he said, Koppel, in a very brief and accurate way, he said, you know what the problem with you guys is? That you value ideology more than you value facts. And I think it encapsulated in a few words what I'm trying to say here today. Facts have become dispensable. Truth is departing from our discourse. And the problem is that we still don't understand in what kind of a crazy world of reporting, of understanding reality we are living. And, you know, I'm holding here a report published in the New York Times a couple of months ago, Trump's Lies, it's called. They are keeping track of all the president's lies. The Washington Post did it first and counted in the first 133 days of Trump's presidency 32 lies. In the first 40 days of his presidency, there was not one day without a lie. And of course, it started in his campaign, which was triggered by him saying that Obama was not born in the USA. That's a lie. And then saying that more people turned into his inauguration than in any inauguration before that, that's a lie. That the ratings of his inauguration on television was higher than ever before, that's a lie. That crime rate is coming down, that's a lie. That unemployment is coming down because of his policies, that's a lie. One morning he woke up and he tweeted that there was a terror attack in Sweden just because he saw some rerun on Fox, that's a lie. The Swedish people are still looking and still trying to understand what happened that night in Sweden because they didn't hear something or anything happening. And you know that, there's a quote attributed to Stalin that he said that the death of one person is a tragedy, the death of a million is statistics. I'm afraid that Stalin practiced it rather than had some intelligent things to say about it. But that's the same with lies, with non-facts, with so-called alternative facts. When it happens in such a mess, when it happens daily, when it happens in the White House, that's when the tragedy becomes statistics. And that's when, in Hebrew, we might say, we are witnessing the nirmul shel hatirlul, when craziness becomes sanity, when we don't even understand what's happening. Now, when Trump says, and he says it, my voters just don't care. They don't care if I lie, if I say the truth. They don't care where I grope any kind of woman who ever crossed my way. They don't care if, and he said it, even if I shoot someone on Fifth Avenue, they will keep voting for me. Now, is that explainable? Is that understandable? I read somewhere, someone said that the real enigma of Trump's popularity goes to the fact that he's a stupid man's idea of a smart man, a poor man's idea of a rich man, and a weak man's idea of a strong man. Maybe. It sounds good. I don't know if that's the case. But when I tried to think about it, I realized it's less important. It's less important to understand Trump's amazing political success. It is much more important to understand what it is doing to us and what the culture of fake news, of alternative news, of fading truth, of fading facts, what is that causing us? Now, enter Bibi Netanyahu. And ask yourself, is that the same story? Of course it is not. But there is one common denominator which is unquestionable. And that is something I can tell you from personal experience. I don't know who is the real thing and who is the copycat. But I do know that both these savvy, intelligent, some would say dangerous, political leaders, both of them understood something, that we reporters are not a liability. We are an asset. Every time we come after them, every time we have a revelation, an expose, an investigative piece, a good report about the wrongdoings of their administrations, for them it's an asset, it is not a liability. And I had the privilege, or the questionable privilege, of understanding it when we came on the air about 1.5 years ago with an investigative piece about the decision-making process in Bibi Netanyahu's era. And we got, about a day before we ran it on the air, we got an amazing response. I guess the Israeli part of the audience might remember that. 6 minutes long, and I read it on camera, and everything there was not true other than the spelling of my name. Which is nice that they spelled your name correctly. And he called me extreme, that's for you, Richard, he called me extreme leftist, and he twisted everything that I ever did, and he personally signed on to that response. Now, when I read it, I have to tell you that, when I read this response on camera, and of course I got many reactions, and then my WhatsApp was on fire, and everybody was saying, so you're so brave, you're so courageous. And I figured that the people who are texting me these kind of responses are very specific people. And I know that many other people, and those are the people that Netanyahu was addressing, Many other people would rather believe him than believe me. But then, the day after, when I woke up, I realized something else. Of course, we are an asset. We are an asset because both Netanyahu and Trump understand that a vast majority of their political base feels disenfranchised, feels like they don't belong, feels marginalized, feels oppressed by a real or an imaginary cultural elite. And since that is what they feel, they will identify with a leader that comes and goes and chases the media. The question now is, what do we do? And that's the insight that I had the next morning. The insight that I had the next morning, other than needing some hours of sleep, is that for him, it might be politically beneficial to identify me as his rival. For me, it would be disastrous to identify him as my rival. He is not and will never be my rival. He is, and perhaps forever will be, my prime minister. He is my prime minister. He is not, some would laugh and some would not. He is my prime minister. And as such, he is my story, not my rival. He is my subject, my object, my story. And now the question is whether we, be it an agenda-driven media, be it left-wing, right-wing, can we still cover reality unbiased, honestly, responsibly, thoroughly, and in a matter that does not get to the rivalry which some political leaders, such as Netanyahu and Trump, would want us to be? Can we still do that? And I have to tell you, when I watched Netanyahu the other day presenting the Iranian nuclear archive, and I saw the way that the instinct of everybody covering it was, if you come from the right, then you see it as the new Bar Kokhba, the new hero defending Israel from the threat of annihilation by the Iranian nuclear military program, which is hidden and so forth. And if you come from the left, then it was just pure theater of a good player who knows his way with good English and, you know, pulls down the curtain and knows how to present it on stage. Nothing new, nothing real, nothing factual, just pure theater. Guys, it's neither that nor that. It is a savvy political leader with a political agenda that some might agree to and some might not, doing his job in the way that he feels that is the best for him and for Israel, perhaps in that order, and perhaps in another order. But here's another point. Because everything I said now comes down to the fact, or to facts, and to the importance of facts. But I was asking myself this morning, on my way here, what is it in news coverage that makes the Israeli story special, that makes it different? And I got to tell you that I understood that when I traveled to Afghanistan some 6 years ago, and I was embedded with a Marines platoon in the southern part of Afghanistan in Helmand district, which was a terrible place. A bloody war was still going on, still is going on. And the Americans let me join this platoon and be with them for a couple of days. When I came back, and it took me a while to edit the piece, I realized that I have to make sure that all the soldiers that I interviewed over there are still alive. And I found out that one of them was killed in the meantime. A guy, a lieutenant, a young, handsome, beautiful lieutenant, that was telling me about a battle in which he took part, and he lost most of his comrades in this battle. He was very obviously still traumatized. And he told me that it's a daily thing there, engaging in fire exchanges with Taliban. And he was killed 2 weeks after I left Afghanistan. And I was looking in America, and I got this report from the Marines headquarters, from his commanders. And I was looking on American media for any report, for a report, for one report on this guy's death. Nothing, nothing, not one report, not one newspaper clip, no mention on the internet, nothing. The only thing that I was able to find was on YouTube. One of his neighbors uploaded a home video that they took of his funeral, of his coffin being driven in the streets of his hometown in Maine. And I took this video and I integrated it into our piece. Later, I contacted his parents and I told them that I have an interview with their son. And I spent a couple of hours with him, and we sent them our video footage and all the material that we had. His name was Jack Zimmerman. I asked him, he wasn't Jewish, and it has something to do with what I want to tell you. So why are we different? We are different because in this country, when we come to report, yes, the facts that we need to report, most of us reporters are part of this common endeavor that is called the Zionist enterprise. Most of us will never be able to report as foreign correspondents, katav zar, which is kind of a way of looking at things. We look at our reality from within. And when I go and interview a mother who lost her son in the Second Lebanon War, and I do a report about her son and about David Grossman's son and about 4 tank fighters who were killed in the same day in the same tank in the Second Lebanon War, I report about it differently. And she and another mother will attend my daughter's wedding next week because they are part of our lives now. And when I do another story about 3 soldiers who were killed in the last war in Gaza, in Tzuk Eitan, then every Yom Zikaron, every Memorial Day, I will go to the cemetery where their family lives because they are part of our story. What I'm trying to tell you goes deeper than that. You know, Amos Oz, our great author, said once that Zionism brought us to this country because someone was out to get us abroad in the diaspora, be it in Poland, in Hungary, in Morocco, or in Iraq. Someone was out to get us. And Zionism was our recipe to stay alive. Zionism was our recipe not to be murdered anymore. But Zionism, but the point is, and here I get to my final point, the point is that Zionism can take us this far. You know, he said something even more beautiful, Amos Oz. He said that a revolution is perfect only before it materializes into reality. Anybody who ever got married knows that a dream is perfect before it turns into reality. Once it turns into reality, it is bound to be flawed because it turned into reality. And after almost 30 years of marriage, I can tell, don't tell it to my daughter who gets married next week. Or rather, don't tell it to her spouse. But what is the gist of it? The gist of it is that the Zionist enterprise, which is a miracle, could bring us that far. It could help us stop dying. It cannot help us start living in the deep, in the sane, in the normal, in the rich sense of the world. And this is where we, reporters, jurists, bankers, gatekeepers, this is where we enter the picture. This is where I connect to what I said before. Our role in the Zionist revolution is to turn and start to build the normal phase of it.
the democratic phase of it. Not democracy in the sense of nose counting, not democracy in the statistical sense of the word, democracy in the minority sense of the word. Democracy not as a charter for majority rule, but democracy as a charter for minority rights. Democracy not as a charter for politicians being elected every 4 or 2 or 1.5 years, but democracy as human rights being preserved, human liberties being preserved, freedom of speech being preserved, the poor people's rights being preserved. It's not for nothing that I pointed at Dr. Flug, because those of us who understand that politics, that political democracy is not only the fight between the different fractions, but it is the mutual commitment to these basic human rights, to these basic notions of human liberties, then we as Israelis will understand this is the second phase of Zionism. This is the one that we should be committed to. And this is something that we, all the gatekeepers who are now on the defensive because of what I told you at the beginning, all the gatekeepers, be it the state controller or the attorney general, the Supreme Court of Israel or the governor of the Israeli bank, the journalists, the reporters, the professors, the academia, this is something that we should be committed to. And one thing that we have to remember, those changes which are so dangerous, those changes in the political atmosphere that some leaders know how to ride and how to take advantage of, those changes are sometimes very difficult to detect. Democracies don't die overnight, but they fade out in the darkness. This is something that I keep telling to myself. I keep telling to myself because we will never know when the line is crossed. We will never know when is it the point in time in which it becomes irreversible. It still didn't. And when I try to formulate or to structure our role as reporters, just as reporters, I think it is particularly three important roles. One is to come back to basics, back to the facts, back to fact-based, old school, old-fashioned, romantic, real, professional, honorable, responsible reporting. Back to the facts. Just report on the facts. Fake news, it's not what we do, it's what they say that we do. We have to get back to facts and to convince our viewers, our audience, our readers that facts matter, that they are important, even more than ideology. The other thing that we have to do is to stay on guard, to keep looking for this fine line that once it is crossed, it will be too late. And the final thing that we have to do, and that's the hardest, is to fear them not to be afraid. And if there's something that I take from my law studies, it is one paragraph written by a Jewish American Supreme Court judge. His name was Louis Brandeis. And for me, he is the most amazing of them all, because he was on the dissent, because he understood something before his comrades did. Because when Anita Whitney, a communist activist, was convicted on criminal offense just because she came to a meeting of female activists in California, and she talked about the right of labor to unionize, and she was sent to prison. Brandeis wrote a dissent in her favor. And he wrote these words, which for me are the most important anima amin, the most important credo of them all. He said, those of us, those who won our independence, believed liberty to be the secret of happiness and courage to be the secret of liberty. They believed that the freedom to think as you will and to speak as you think are means indispensable for the discovery and the spread of political truth. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think you heard the echo. I noted down the importance of freedom of speech, and I recall during the time of the USSR when somebody said, we have freedom of speech. The only problem is we do not have freedom after speech. And indeed, democracies do not die of old age. And that's an important message. Which brings us now to the unique, I said last time I introduced our good friend Richard Quest, that if the word "the" was invented, it was to say the Richard Quest. Richard Quest is an institution. It's not just a person. It's an institution that needs to be protected by democratic laws. He actually demonstrated, and that's a very self-serving remark, that economics does not need to be boring, that everyone can find a lot of interest in it. He is actually the CNN anchor and correspondent and editor-at-chief on CNN Money. But when I say, and obviously he's the network's most prominent face in many dimensions, including if you are in Hong Kong, in Tokyo, in Paris, in London, in Wall Street, in Tel Aviv, you turn on the television, you see him. And if you can't fall asleep and you watch him, you will not fall asleep. It's not an accident, and he's probably the only economic journalist that heads of states are standing in line to be interviewed by him, because they know that they will be watched and he will be very fairly distributing. And the word that was said about the importance of facts is a very important one. Everyone is entitled to his own opinion, but nobody is entitled only to his own views and his own facts. Facts are something that needs to be shared and agreed upon. So when Prime Minister Cameron wanted to spread his word, he sought to be interviewed by Richard Quest. When the heads of the financial organization, whether it is Christine Lagarde from the IMF or the president of the World Bank or anyone else of this caliber want to spread their message, they go to Richard Quest. And not only them, when the Dalai Lama wants to be seen by people who watch economic things in an entertaining way, he goes to Richard Quest. And not only this, even the Playboy magazine Hugh Hefner and the actress Joan Collins, and yes, also US President Donald Trump. I will not elaborate anymore because the question now is, what are you going to talk about? When we stepped into the room, you said I can talk about the clouds on the horizon. And then I can talk about fake news. And maybe they are the same. Whatever you want, the floor is yours, Richard. We are looking for you. Dear friend.
As I stand here and look out at the distinguished guests that we have here, I am struck by two thoughts. The first is, what the hell am I doing here? Sandwiched between a former president, a sitting governor, and one of the most distinguished journalists in the world. Oh, and a chairman of a bank. How the hell did I get myself into this mess? And then I think to myself, what the hell am I doing here? And how I wish my late father could see it. I'm standing in Tel Aviv University as part of the most prestigious debate of the event, And I think that most of us at some point in the world have thought they're going to find me out. At some point, Jacob or the president of the university will say, I'm terribly sorry, we made a mistake. Kind of you to come, we'll see you in the future. But so far they haven't found me out today. And I'm going to keep my remarks brief because there really is nothing that I can add usefully to what we've heard already. I mean, I can prattle on for hours. I'm a television presenter. It's what I get paid to do. But you've got questions that you will want to ask, and we need to get on with that part. The one thing I will talk about, though, for 5 minutes or so, is this question of fake news and what is the role of the media today, and particularly for an organisation like CNN, which is seen in just about every country in the world. Billions of households, the numbers, look, the statistics are there, we've got more viewers than everybody else combined, whatever. But with that vast range comes tremendous responsibility. And I remember, as a trainee journalist, I remember the quote from Rumpole of the Bailey. I'm sure some of you have read Rumpole. And he had a junior barrister who he was training, an article clerk, and this article clerk had broken some rules. And Rumpole basically said, you can bend the rules, you can twist the rules, you can stretch the rules, you can go round the rules, but you must never break the rules. And he then went on to say, and when it comes to opinions in the newsroom, you leave them with your hat and coat at the door. And that's something I've tried to follow throughout the 30-odd years that I've been doing it. Because the easiest way is to get sucked in through your own views, opinions, and prejudices. Particularly in an era of social media, where everybody enjoys the incontinence of being able to spew their views at a moment's notice to anywhere in the world. How much more difficult is it for the good doctor and myself who have to sit there? We can't just... Look, some years ago I discovered this by accident. I was in South Africa and I'd had a really shitty time with waiting for a plane to take off. And I tweeted about the airline. Something rather... Yeah, it was one of those intemperate tweets. Send. And I thought nothing more of it. Next morning, I'm in Johannesburg, and there's a billboard from the morning newspaper, Quest blasts South African Airways. And before long, the email arrives from Atlanta. Richard, we're getting reports of something you said. What was it and why? And I learnt at that very early stage, you've got to be bloody careful what you tweet. In the same way that one has to be very careful what one says in a forum like this, up to a point, whilst remaining true to the views that one holds or the obligations that one has. But neither the good doctor nor myself enjoy the luxury of that incontinence and that immaturity to suddenly spout whatever we may think. Now, on this question of facts and managing the media, this is really nothing new. Those of us who are old enough will remember in the 1980s, the Margaret Thatcher government, in a bid to silence the IRA, came up with the ludicrous notion that the IRA's voices could not be heard. You had to have the voices spoken by an actor. So you would get these reports, it would be Jerry Adams or Martin McGuinness, and they'd have been given a quote or an interview, and suddenly you get this very strong BBC, well, we think this is, and it was completely out of character, because their voices could not be heard. They had to be spoken by an actor. And that lasted for so many years until finally everybody realized the futility and uselessness of this, and it was given and it was dropped. But those were the days when there was as much pressure being brought to bear on us as journalists as there is today. The difference is the plurality of distribution that allows other voices correctly into the public domain. Every single one of you here is a publisher in your own right. The fact that most of that which you publish is of only interest to your grandchildren is relevant within your own circle. So when we talk about what's happening at the moment with Donald Trump or with Brexit or any of the issues of the day, the worst thing that we can do is lose our heads over it. It requires cold, calculating movement. It requires detailed analysis and consideration. So our boss at CNN is quite clear on this. It's why we have this campaign, Facts First, with the apple, which isn't a banana. And it will never be a banana because it's an apple. And some people will tell you that it's not, but it is. It's an apple. And that's why people have thought to us, have criticised this campaign and said it was all too simplistic, blah, blah, blah. It's not. Facts first. Facts foremost. The first and only thing you care about is the facts. And you let other people decide what to do about it. The reason it is important, and again it was referred to by other colleagues here, there is a groundswell of supporters for these extreme views because of the negligence, and it is negligence, of leaders in allowing these people to become disenfranchised. If you tell people often enough that they have nothing, they're going to get nothing, and they have no hope for the future, you are going to get the result that you've got. And it's the same with world trade. With respect, economists, presidents, prime ministers, director generals of the WTO have told the populations of the world trade is good. The rising tide lifts all boats. And I've no doubt the governor has an entire raft of statistics that will prove the point. But tell that to the coal miner in Pennsylvania. Tell that to the car worker in Northern England or the person in Eastern England that lost their job because of imported labour from Eastern Europe. I am not saying we can do anything about those facts. But I am saying that leaders have been negligent, bordering on mendacious, in not preparing populations for the future. And that is why I leave you with one thought. We are about, and Jack Ma talked about it, others have talked about it, we are about to face the biggest revolution known in our history. It is artificial intelligence, it is quantum computing, it is going to revolutionize the way every single person in this room does their job. It will revolutionize you being in retirement, it will revolutionize your grandchildren's education, everything. And once again, our leaders are not standing up to the job. They are not telling us the truth. They are not telling you or preparing you for higher taxation to pay for the retraining that's necessary. They are not restructuring economies so that you can be prepared for those days in the future where you're going to clearly need greater resources to address a growing number of unemployed, which Deloitte have estimated at somewhere up to 300 million people. I'm not going to leave you on an apocalyptic note. I'm going to leave you with one simple thing, one simple thought. It's very easy for people like me, and I'm going to be crude about this. It's very easy for people like me, and any of us on television, to believe that your shit doesn't stink. It's true. You go on television every night, you pontificate to your heart's content, and everybody says, oh, that was very good. And that is why The creed for people like me and anybody who has any role in this sort of business has to be facts first and leave your opinions with your hat and your coat at the door. You may not like what you see. I may not like a policy. I may not like a president. I may not like something, but it is not my job to reveal that dislike. It is my job to tell you the pitfalls of what that president, prime minister, or policy is going to do. And ladies and gentlemen, it's up to you to decide if you want to continue with it. You will be the best judges of that, whether it be Brexit, Donald Trump, but provided we give you the information, then you can make your own judgment. Thank you for giving me the great honour of being here.
Thank you, thank you. Thank you, Richard. Thank you to all the opening remarks. Thank you for the great reception on the part of our audience. One of the professional hazards of being in television is that your commitments are preset in terms of timing. And that's why our queen of television, Ilana, will need to leave us to do her day job, which therefore we spontaneously decided that as we go now to the Q&A, we will first keep in mind, if you have a question directed at her, that's fine. And when she leaves the room in a few minutes, it is not by protest, it is not a protest against anyone. Okay, the floor is open. Just feel free. Anything goes. You are always hesitating asking the first question. Let me ask from the second. Yes. Second question, top row, as far as Canada. Stand up, introduce yourself. Wait, microphones are there? I know, but there is, wait a second. There is a remote, לא שומעים. Okay, start shooting. Okay, excuse me, 1 second. Is there any question for the honorary doctor of Tel Aviv and Yale doctor Ilana Dayan, and we will get to, you will be the first when it comes to the question. Please, here, please pass the microphone. First question, identify yourself. Brief question, brief answer, will be given the chance to many. Yes?
Brain in from London. The plurality of distribution that was mentioned, I think, is probably something that has overrun us to a certain extent. And I think we all find it very hard to check the sources of any information we're getting. And that definitely helps fake news, because we are assuming that what we hear is worth listening to. And I don't know what your view on that is. Do we make sure that it's a big heard as opposed to just opinions which are completely valueless?
Since there is a remote room, let me repeat very quickly the question. The question was, how do we poor listeners know to distinguish between fake, no fake news in the world in which accountability is not the strongest asset of the social media? Ilana, maybe I'll tell you, the camera is for the remote room. Can I impose on you to come here? Start shout and you will not be seen in the other room. That's fine. Shoot. No, I was just afraid of my Sergeant General, Anat. She told, but now this is popular demand that revolutionize democracy. Shoot. Microphone. תן לה את המיקרופון. רוץ מסביב.
You don't, and you will never really, you didn't ever have the possibility to ascertain if you can believe him or me or anybody else. It's just the track record of our work that can make us be believable. Now, you're right that in the world of Facebook and Twitter and social media and WhatsApp, we are flooded with all kinds of reporters, because the kid in Ethiopia and the Queen of England are, both of them are a double click away from public discourse. In that sense, you're right. And you're right that it's even more difficult to know whom to believe to. But at the end of the day, this is really, from my point of view, the most important argument in favor of old school mainstream media. Because the one thing that we have, that those guys out there don't have, is the track record. Is the fact that we've been there for you for many years, and you can decide if we are believable or not.
Thank you. So you basically connected the concept of credibility, track record, and that's what brings me also, that's why Karnit is here today, because of the credibility in the track record. We move to Richard. Wait. Yes, Richard.
Very quickly on that. We have a good example of this in the last 24 hours. NBC yesterday had a story about something to do with Trump and Stormy Daniels and the payments. Overnight, they had to correct that story. It wasn't a major correction. It was a minor correction on a major story, but they still corrected it. So my point is, NBC, one of the most reputable institutions in journalism, they had no problem correcting something like we've had no problem or you've had no problem. You have to go by provenance and tradition. The New York Times, if it gets it wrong, it'll tell you it's got it wrong. If you go to bignews.this, it's a fair bet they don't have the track record that you can rely on.
Which never happened, by the way, with the post uploaded by our Prime Minister the other day about some wrongdoing in a soccer stadium in an Arab village in the northern part of Israel. He never admitted that he was wrong. Never did.
Thank you very much. We are moving to the next question. Micha Geiger, please, we will get to you. Please, shoot. Brief.
The question is to Ilan.
Shh.
Do you really, I listened to Richard Quest regarding his concept that a reporter should only talk about the facts. This is true about Richard Quest, who reports to the world. Ilana, when you report to Israel in Uvda, in a way you represent in this country a minority here, I repeat, a minority which hates what is happening with the majority, which has a lot of criticism on the government and the way that things are being. Don't you think that people don't you believe? No, that's we know that this is a minority, but let's not get into it, because we know that this is a democracy and we know who are the majority. But my question is to Ilana, don't you believe that because of the position as a reporter and as a person that you have in this country, people don't expect only to hear facts from you, but also opinions?
Thank you very much. We will delay the answer to have another question so you can pull them all together. Please raise your hand, identify yourself, much briefer question, and you will get an answer. Shoot.
Hello.
Identify yourself.
Leon Amram. Between fact reporting and opinion reporting, there is a line, and in the middle of that line is something called analysis. And many readers require analysis. How do you decorticate opinion from analysis?
Thank you very much. Ilana and Richard is allowed to answer too. Wait a second, Ilana. You need to get the microphone, please. Shoot.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I think Richard is the perfect person to answer that. But I do take from those both questions something that is important to say. An apple will never be a banana. That's true. It's an apple, and don't let anybody tell you it's a banana. But when you want to analyze something, and when you want to bring context to something, that's where analysis comes in, and that's when, sometimes your view on things can come in.
But, and that's a big but, two things you must still make sure that don't happen. That your opinion doesn't cloud the facts. This is one thing, and I want to give you an example to that. When we got a story a couple of years ago about an extreme right, Human Rights Watch organization operating in the West Bank, whose primary activist was turning in settlers or people who wanted to buy land from for settlers, turning them in to the Palestinian security forces, knowing that they will be tortured and perhaps killed over there. We got a story which tainted in a negative light a human rights activist, right? Now, I knew for a fact, the moment we got this story, no matter what my view is in politics or even about the human rights organizations, that this story has to see the light of day. So that's as far as facts go. On the other hand, I did know that there is a witch hunt against human rights organizations in Israel today, that this is something that many people wait for, this kind of report, to kill them all. Breaking Silence and B'Tselem and other organizations, which are doing no harm, or you can debate that, but you cannot debate the fact that they are important in the Israeli political public discourse. Now what do you do? And my answer is, you bring first and foremost the facts, and yes, you bring the analysis, and yes, you give some context, and yes, you tell how important it is for us to have these organizations, but at the same time you emphasize that when there's wrongdoing, you discover, you uncover, you expose the wrongdoing on both sides of the political arena. I'll give you one last example. There was on Channel 20, which doesn't hide their right-wing agenda, there was a report a couple of weeks ago about the driver who recorded the son of the prime minister. The son of the prime minister going into strippers clubs and speaking about his experience with whores and stuff like that. And he recorded Yair Netanyahu, right? And then this right-wing channel, TV channel, exposed the fact that the driver is now working as a private investigator. Now one can ask from the analysis point of view, is it important? Perhaps. Is it very important? Perhaps. Is it more important than the fact that Yair Netanyahu is speaking the way he speaks? No. This is the answer. You can bring another part of the puzzle. You can complete it with your own, but you don't ever forget what is more important and what is less important.
Thank you very much. Richard, please.
Look, as I discovered yesterday or the day before yesterday when I was talking at the dental school, there will be people who are watching a program that have a diametrically opposed view to whatever the prevalent view is. The Trump lovers versus the Trump haters. The Bibi lovers versus the Bibi haters. Nothing that we say is going to change those people's perceptions one way or the other. Guaranteed.
If it did, imagine how many times Shimon Peres would be prime minister.
Right. So what you do, I mean, when I sit down and do an interview with somebody who has a politician or somebody who has a really strong perspective on something, I know that there is nothing worse than me trying to bash away at that person's view. He's not going to turn round and suddenly say, do you know, Richard, I hadn't heard that argument before. God, for the last 20 years, I have been erroneous. I must go and repent. It's not going to happen. So all we do is take your argument and we prod it, and we push it, and we turn it, and we test it, and now, we come up with an assessment, not a judgment, not an opinion, but an assessment of an analysis. And that's, if we have done our job right, that's what you get. If we have done our job wrong, or you don't like us, switch over.
Thank you, thank you. I want to see a hand.
I always thought that you can either have pathos or a sense of humor. Now I realize you can have both.
ענת מאחורייך. Here. תכף.
Thank you very much, Ron.
Please,
Keith.
ladies and gentlemen, please. Richard.
Ron,
yes.
Keith.
Please introduce yourself and speak loud.
Roz Kushinsky from Australia, and I would like to ask Ilana, just shorten your name, and perhaps Richard, briefly, knowing the sort of algorithms and all those sort of artificial and possibly unintended, with the effect that they have, those things built into social media. How do you fight against the sort of trending that occurs, the pushing forward of extreme views of what might initially be, but then takes a life that we don't want? How do you control that?
Understood. Thank you very much. Ilana, please, because you need to go, so please. Another question, please. Yes, here, at the end. Who's Richard?
Richard Anton. So, Dr. Fluke made a very interesting point about the dispersal in educational attainment, and a lot of analysis has been done of the Brexit referendum in the UK, and the outcome of voting was very, very strongly correlated with educational attainment. It's striking that in this country there's this wide gap in educational attainment, and I don't think we'd be right where we are to let the university or the education system off of the hook, because it's educational attainment that allows people to deal with and assess analysis. So I'd like to ask about how we improve educational attainment much more broadly in this country and in other countries where there's a very wide gap.
Thank you very much. This was Richard Anton, the president of our English-British friends. So obviously it was directed to... You need a microphone? These two people.
Fluke, so I'll leave you with a final note in response to your answer, to your question. You know, there's so much we can do as reporters. I don't believe that we have really the ability, not even, I don't know about the responsibility, but the ability to do what you are asking about, which is to tame and to calm down public discourse in an era in which, you're right, the extreme gets so much more attention and so much more exposure. You're right in that respect. And that's something that I think that's a battle that we might have lost. We might have lost this battle. But the more we stick to the facts, the more we stick to responsible reporting, the more we don't let those who want to cloud the facts, the more we don't let them get their way, and this is something that we have to keep in mind. When Richard was speaking before about the irresponsible way in which leaders neglect our future, not only do they neglect our future, they then take advantage of the fact that many people feel disadvantaged because of the way they neglect the future. So what we can do is keep sticking to the facts, and if I can leave you with one thing that corresponds to what Richard was saying, is one sentence that I keep in mind. It was Ben Bradley from the Washington Post, the editor-in-chief of the paper that uncovered the Watergate scandal. And he said, when they tell me what the formal truth is, I start looking for the real truth. So this is our responsibility, and this is our duty. And I really apologize that I have to leave you with that, but I leave you with my excellent colleagues. Thank you very much. Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you, Ilana. Thank you, Ilana. Dr. Ilana Dayan. Okay, we are moving on with our program. Okay, there was one question addressed to Karnit. She will show us about a very short please.
Regarding Israel.
About the education.
I think the main important issue is to provide the core curriculum to all parts, to all schools. That's not exactly happening now in Israel. That means science, math, English, to everybody, and I think there should be more resources, especially diverted towards the weaker parts of society in the periphery. In very short.
Thank you very much. Our Sergeant Major, Anat, is threatening to take over. So in order to prevent that democratically arranged revolution, I'm going to move on. Please stay in your seats. Please stay in your seats. I'm going to invite now the president of the university to come up. I'm going to invite Jamie Gertler and Eric Gertler also to join, please, the presidium. And we are going to, in a very seamless way, please stay, move on in a very dramatic way. Then we will have a quick summary. Thank you. Please.
So we are now starting the inauguration of the Jacob Frenkel and Mort Zuckerman Institute for Global Economics. But before that, I can't just stay there and not comment on what Ilana said. And I just want to say, as the president of the university and the head of the committee of presidents, you cannot ignore what she said, and you cannot underestimate the slippery slope that we are on these days. And the freedom of speech, which was so trivial, so taken for granted in the past, is starting to crack. So this is where we are, and this is Israel 2018. Now back to the happier stuff. Our board of governors campaign motto is, be part of the next big idea. The idea behind it, try to bring a donor and relate him to a big idea, and he will donate to the big idea. With Mort Zuckerman, it was different. With Mort Zuckerman, it was bring your own idea and pay for it. And Mort Zuckerman relationship with the university and with the Israeli universities actually was really to try and help us with bringing from abroad, actually our United States, as many postdocs, postdoctoral fellows, that we can sponsor them. And the idea behind it is strengthen the relationship between US and Israel on the academic level. And this is, again, a way to fight the BDS. In addition, they also try to help us with recruiting Israelis who would like to come back to Israel and get a job here. So all 7 Israeli universities are part of this initiative. It's an initiative of $100 million over a number of years, very impressive. And Eric and Jamie Gertler are now responsible for this program. Thank you very, very much. We had the other day a nice gathering around the program with some of the awardees, and this is something that really, I believe, will make a difference. And now there is a second stage to this generosity, and this is to really mark the very good relationship and good friendship between Jacob Frenkel and Mort Zuckerman. And in order to really mark it in a way that, again, the university wins. There is an institute that we inaugurate now, which is the Frenkel-Zuckerman Institute of Global Economy. And I would say that the institute recognizes this long-standing professional friendship and also relates to the topic that was close to both Mort and Jacob. So the only thing I have to do now is to give the certificates to the 2 brothers. Oh, okay. Jamie and Okay, וזאת לתעודה, this is to witness on the 4th day of May 2018, the Jacob Frankel and Mort Zuckerman Institute for Global Economics was inaugurated by James Gertler, by Eric Gertler, thereby creating a vital hub for developing sound economic policy and generating and disseminating excellence in scholarship on international financial markets, deepening insights on the effects of innovation and technology in promoting economic growth, and honoring monumental and lasting contributions of Professor Jacob A. Frankel and Mr. Mortimer B. Zuckerman to the State of Israel, to the historic integration of Israeli economy into the global economic and financial system, and to Tel Aviv University. Signed by Professor Yaron Oz, Rector, and by myself. This is to witness that on the 4th day of May 2018, the Jacob Frankel and Mort Zuckerman Institute of Global Economics was inaugurated by Eric and James Gertler, and it actually says thereby creating a vital hub, and same thing, and this is given to Professor Frankel.
Oh, it's okay. On behalf of my brother Eric Gertler and myself, we are delighted to be here to inaugurate the Jacob Frankel and Mort Zuckerman Institute for Global Economics. You know, before I came to Israel, I was in New York talking to my wife Caroline, and I said, Caroline, could you imagine in your wildest dreams that your husband is leaving New York to go to Tel Aviv to inaugurate a very important institute in economics? She looks at me and she says, honey, in my wildest dreams, you don't exist. Today witnesses the bringing to life of an idea that honored two remarkable men, Jacob Frankel and Mort Zuckerman. We're here for really one reason and one reason only, friendship. Our uncle Mort Zuckerman and Jacob have been dear friends for a better part of a quarter century, bonded by a common vision and a core set of values. At the center is their unconditional love and dedication to Israel. Both have made significant contributions to the development and success of the State of Israel. Mort through the political, public policy, and philanthropic arenas, and of course Jacob through the economic arena. Both have worked to strengthen Israel's international standing. For decades, Mort has been a moral voice defending freedom, shaping public opinion, and guiding international leaders to understand Israel's unique character and role in the world. As governor of the Bank of Israel, Jacob led the effort to stabilize the Israeli economy and to integrate it into the global financial and economic system. This laid the foundations for what is known today, and you've heard this so many times, Startup Nation. Further, Mort and Jacob share a common commitment to Jewry. Mort played a pivotal role in freeing Jews from the former Soviet Union, and Jacob was instrumental in structuring Israel's economy to help absorb the massive flow of immigrants to become constructive members of Israeli society. Eric and I wanted to find a way to honor and express our deep appreciation and gratitude to you, Jacob, and to Mort for all you've done to help Israel flourish. Tel Aviv University, a preeminent university in Israel, with its pursuit of excellence, was a natural partner to create the Jacob Frankel and Mort Zuckerman Institute for Global Economics at Tel Aviv University. It also didn't hurt that Jacob is the chairman of the Board of Governors. Now, if it's Frankel Zuckerman in English and Hebrew, it's read right to left, does that mean it's Zuckerman Frankel in Hebrew? Our vision is for the Institute to become a hub for developing economic policy and cutting-edge research on international finance, as well as for emerging fields such as the effects of technology on economic growth. We believe that the Institute will blaze a trail in generating new thought, analysis, and perspective, and will help Israel and other nations navigate their economies towards prosperity and stability in an era where change is occurring at an ever-increasing rate. Eric and I are proud to honor two great men as we inaugurate the Jacob Frankel and Mort Zuckerman Institute for Global Economics at Tel Aviv University in what we believe is an important and worthwhile investment in the future. Jacob.
Thank you very much, dear friends. At this stage, we are done with speeches. So if I wanted just to conclude with two words, I would have said thank you, or in one word, I would have said thanks, but it's really inappropriate. So I will just say a few sentences. First and foremost, I'm obviously deeply honored and humbled, but as Jack Ma told us yesterday, when things get big, then they are not yours anymore. So in a way, the success of the Israeli economy, the development of Tel Aviv University, etc., do not belong to a person or persons. It becomes part of our DNA. And if this is going to be another part of the DNA, let it be. And I'm proud to be another element in this big DNA. Second, I must tell you that I would not have been here, seriously speaking. Well, I mentioned in the plenary yesterday that about 50 years ago, the only building was here on campus. That's when I started and all the rest. And I was really in America for the better part of the period. Until in 91, I was invited to come back to be governor of the central bank and one of Karnit's predecessors. And I told you something, and here I'm so happy to have my two daughters with me, Orly and Tali. They were both very young teenagers at the time, very young. And when I told them that we are about to say goodbye to all of their friends and move from a mansion to a little apartment and all of these kind of things, and I gave them the right to vote, they went to the next door and got what two young American girls would do. They got a button that says, "Go for it." And since then, the button is with me. And today, the important point is that while their mother tongue was English at the time, today both are PhDs from Tel Aviv universities. Both are having their own careers, building their families, all in this great country. And that's the intergenerational issue. And I'm so happy to share all of this event with my very good love, Iris, and with the rest of our friends. Public sector, private sector, academia, citizens, they are all going together. And therefore, we will try in this institute to bring the best, not only in theoretical studies, which are extremely important, but also in applicable studies, to bring about what it takes for the economy to be successful and prosperous. Stability, of course, it's our bread and butter, Karnit. Macroeconomics, of course. Technology, progress, innovations. And, you know, in our university, we have already the tradition of people who come from the university, going to the public sector, then come back to the university. People like Professor Manuel Trachtenberg, who has done all of these things. So I think this is a model that we want to cultivate, to develop, to move on. The cooperation between private and public sector, it's not they and us, it is all together. And thank you so much. We are all invited for lunch. Thank you.